Most millionaires aren't really millionaires. Well, at least not once you take out the value of their home. On paper, they look like they've made it. Nice house, solid net worth, 7 figures if you check the right box on a spreadsheet. But if you subtract their home equity, suddenly things look a lot different. Let's start with the definition. A millionaire is someone whose net worth adds up to $1 million or more. That means you total up everything they own with value. Cars, real estate, businesses, collectibles, jewelry, even the random stuff like a stamp collection, and then subtract everything they owe. It's all assets minus liabilities. Now, some people like to debate what should count. They'll say things like, well, you'd have to sell that, so it doesn't really count. Or, that's not liquid, so it shouldn't be included. But that's not how net worth works. Net worth is a simple calculation. What you own minus what you owe. Whether something is sold through a realtor, stamp collection broker, or an auctioneer doesn't change the math. What these people are really describing is what's known as an investable asset millionaire. That means someone with at least $1 million in liquid assets that can be easily turned into cash. This usually includes things like money in bank accounts, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, retirement accounts. While you can sell real estate, vehicles, collectibles, and your family business, they typically aren't counted as investable assets because they're harder to sell quickly, and their value can be more difficult to determine. According to recent data from UBS Global, there are roughly 24 million people with a net worth of $1 million or more in the United States. That's about 7% of the entire U.S. population, or about 9% of total adults. But the numbers change dramatically when you take out that home equity. Roughly 1 in 11 adults in the U.S. qualifies as a millionaire. Sounds impressive at first, and it is, but that number includes everything, even the big one, home equity. When you narrow it down to just investable assets, which for most people basically means excluding the value of their home, the number drops sharply. Only about 2.3% of adults, or about 1.8% of the total U.S. population, actually have $1 million or more in liquid investable wealth. That's roughly 6 million people who meet the standard of an investable asset millionaire. In other words, the overwhelming majority of people who are technically millionaires are only hitting that number because of home equity, not because they have $1 million sitting in the bank or growing in a portfolio. Generally speaking, about 2 out of every 100 people you pass on the highway, see pushing a shopping cart at the store, or boarding a flight at the airport have $1 million or more in liquid investable assets. Not just net worth on paper, but actual wealth they can access and use. It's a small group, and chances are you wouldn't even know who they are. If you've built up enough equity in your home to push your net worth over $1 million, but don't have quite as much in liquid assets, that's still an achievement. Homes are expensive, and paying one off, or even building solid equity, takes time, discipline, and financial stability. But the problem is that home equity isn't exactly usable money. It's not liquid. You can't easily spend it, invest it, or live off it, unless you sell the house, take on a reverse mortgage, or borrow against it. It's wealth on paper, but not in your pocket. That's where the distinction becomes really important, because there's a huge difference between being net worth rich and being financially independent. A couple in their 60s who owns a $750,000 home outright but only has $250,000 in savings is worth $1 million, but they're not retiring anytime soon. They're still dependent on income to cover bills, healthcare, and everything else. On the flip side, someone renting an apartment with no property but $900,000 in index funds and $100,000 in cash could quite possibly quit their job tomorrow and never work again. Technically, both are millionaires, but only one is an investable asset millionaire. And this is the uncomfortable truth that gets lost in most financial discussions. We love throwing around net worth as a measuring stick, but it doesn't tell the full story. Net worth includes everything: the house, the car, the furniture, the retirement accounts, the junk in your garage. But if you want to know who's truly financially secure, you have to ask a more specific question. How much do they really have in investable assets? Those with liquid assets are the people who could theoretically stop working today and still pay their bills indefinitely without having to sell their home. Those are the people with portfolios generating income, cash in the bank, and flexibility. They're not relying on property values to carry their retirement. They've built financial freedom, not just equity. An even better question than net worth might be, how much passive income does someone actually earn? For instance, someone who owns a business valued at over $1 million might not technically count as a liquid millionaire, since that business isn't something they can easily turn into cash. They might be making $300,000 per year with the business running in the background, but if they only have $400,000 in liquid assets, they still wouldn't qualify as a millionaire by investable asset standards. Their total net worth is over 1.4 million, but when we're talking about money that's actually available to invest, it's a different story. Of course, this is a relatively small group. For most people, the biggest difference between their total net worth and their liquid net worth comes from the value of their home. Take the house out of the equation, and the picture changes dramatically. Because for most people, their home is their biggest item of value. In many cases, it's their only real item of value. They might have a small 401k, maybe a small IRA, but the majority of their net worth is tied up in their house. And that's partly a function of how our society works. Buying a home has been the American dream, and for good reason. It forces people to save. It builds real wealth through appreciation, and it offers stability. It's an incredible addition to your overall wealth, but it's no replacement for investing in income-generating assets. Because at the end of the day, you can't eat drywall, you can't pay medical bills with your backyard, and you can't cover an emergency with your equity unless you're willing to take on more debt or leave your home altogether. So while owning a home is absolutely a good thing in many cases, it's not a substitute for actual liquid wealth. It doesn't give you the same kind of freedom that cash and investments do. This difference becomes more obvious during retirement. Millions of people retire with what looks like a solid net worth, say $1 million or more, but still struggle financially. Why? Because a large portion of that net worth is tied up in their home, meaning they're living off modest pensions or Social Security and gradually drawing down their savings just to cover everyday expenses, and to keep up with the ongoing costs of maintaining a high-value home that boosts their net worth but doesn't generate any income. On paper, they look wealthy, but in reality, they're watching every dollar and trying to make it stretch. That's one reason why you often see older homeowners living in homes that need work. They may fully own the house, but they don't have enough income to afford proper upkeep. Now, these people could sell their house and downsize, do a cash-out refinance, rent instead, or even take out a reverse mortgage. All of these options require converting that home equity into cash. Having equity does give them choices, but it's not spending money. They have to take action to turn it into usable funds. On the other hand, someone who's quietly been maxing out their Roth IRA, steadily contributing to a 401k, and investing consistently might not own a home or have any equity, but they can comfortably live off the returns from their portfolio. Of course, they'd still need to cover housing costs, likely through rent, but their financial freedom comes from assets that generate income, not from a house that only costs money. It also explains why the FIRE, or Financial Independence Retire Early community, puts such a strong emphasis on liquid net worth. Most people chasing FIRE couldn't really care less if their home appreciates by $100,000. What they care about is how much passive income they have. They measure success not by what they own, but by how little they need and how long their money can last without a paycheck. A home equity millionaire is much more common than it used to be. With real estate prices skyrocketing over the last decade, especially in certain states, tons of average homeowners have crossed the $1 million threshold without even trying. If you bought a modest home in California 20 years ago, you might be a millionaire today purely because the market exploded. But does that mean you're financially set? Not really. In fact, in many cases, those homeowners are asset rich with non-liquid assets but cash poor. They're still working, still stressed, and still struggling to get ahead, despite what their Zillow estimate says. Many people make the mistake of relying too heavily on their home equity, viewing it as accessible wealth when it's not something they can easily spend. A home can be a valuable part of your net worth, but it shouldn't be the main thing carrying your finances. Real financial stability comes from balancing that equity with liquid assets and passive income. Think savings, investments, and retirement accounts that you can actually use when needed. Without that flexibility, people often find themselves house rich but cash poor, with real wealth that looks good on paper but doesn't translate into real financial freedom.